question on Cuba.
Sure.
There's a high-level delegation that's going to be visiting Cuba soon, US delegation. Does that indicate that maybe relations with Cuba is becoming more normalized, or we're on the cusp of normalized relations with Cuba?
Are you speaking about the law enforcement?
International law and all that.
Sure.
But, I'm sure that they will probably.
Said, let me, if you let me offer some broader thoughts. So for those that might be tracking, U.S. and Cuban officials will meet as part of the US-Cuba law enforcement dialogue in Havana next week to discuss topics of bilateral interest on international law enforcement matters, increased international law enforcement cooperation, and this is an opportunity to enable the U.S. to better protect U.S. citizens and bring transnational criminals to justice. The Departments of State, Justice, and Homeland Security will co-chair the dialogue for the United States. And broadly speaking, Saeed, to your question, improved law enforcement coordination between the United States and Cuba is in the best interest in the United States and the Cuban people. And during the dialogue, the U.S. and Cuba will address topics of bilateral interest. So go ahead, Leon.
Yeah, I just had a follow-up on the question on Cuba.
Sure.
So you said that this meeting on law enforcement issues is in the best interest of the United States. Would you consider that it would be now in the best interest of the United States to actually normalize relations with Cuba? And then second, so there's this meeting on law enforcement issues, criminality, transnational, etc. But the United States still has Cuba on the supporting terrorism list, on its list of supporting states supporting terrorism. How do you justify having that meeting in Cuba while the country is still on your official list of sponsoring terrorism?
Can you repeat the second part of your question, Leon? Sorry.
Basically, how do you justify having this kind of meeting on specifically law enforcement issues in general, while at the same time keeping the country on the terrorism list?
Leon, there continue to be obviously concerns and human rights concerns that exist. But I would say broadly to widen the aperture a little bit, Leon, following the large-scale protests that we saw last summer, President Biden directed the department to act in two primary areas. The first was to promote accountability for human rights abuses, for which we have announced previously several rounds of sanctions targeting those individuals and entities with direct ties to human rights violations. Specifically, within the context of this dialogue, let me see if I have some more information for you. But as I said, engaging in these talks underscores our commitment to pursuing constructive discussions with the government of Cuba where appropriate to advance U.S. interests. Our belief is that establishing and increasing channels for law enforcement cooperation to better address transnational threats is not at the expense of the serious human rights concerns that we continue to have. And we've integrated these human rights concerns and protections into all of our interactions with the Cuban government.
Vedant, isn't the real answer that this administration does not agree with the previous administration's determination to put Cuba back on the SSOT list, and that you've been looking for a way to take them off?
I don't have any,
coming into office.
I don't have any
and therefore that a law enforcement dialogue is not inappropriate, given what you believe is.
A law enforcement dialogue is not inappropriate for a variety of reasons, including the ones that
Well,
I
how
just
many do you
outlined.
have with Iran?
Those are
None.
slightly different
How many
circumstances.
Well, in terms of the SSOT. Anyway,